Now listen, I know the last thing you wanted for Christmas was another glaive. On top of that, considering that the donning really has not changed year over year, it's essentially the exact same thing. The weapons are definitely what's in focus. The new one being Albedo Wing. This is an arc glaive, which by the way, we have 3 of. But the thing that really sets this glaive apart from those other glaives is that it is our second ever legendary aggressive frame glaive. Now visually, it's very similar to that of our other aggressive glaive, that being Judgment of Kel'Grath. No lie though, the paint job looks good. I'm just saying. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive on Albedo Wing to determine whether it is worth your time or not to grind out a good roll or even a god roll over the next 3 weeks. By the way, if you have not checked out our guide for the donning, feel free to check that out, guys. We go over the best ways to farm literally everything in this event and how to really get the most resources as quickly as you can. Now back to Albedo. Again, this is an arc aggressive frame glaive, which I know is a bummer to a lot of people because we assumed, considering that it's Christmas, it's the dawning event, it's cold outside, that this could potentially be our first ever legendary stasis glaive, which would have been unique, especially if Bungie would have given it cold steel. But nope, that didn't happen. And I know why Bungie's making the case that they can't do that here with an event like the dawning, and similar to things like Festival of the Lost, they can't make super exclusive loot during those events. But let's be real, man. Loot is what incentivizes every Destiny player, but I digress. Now with this being an aggressive glaive, its direct competition will be the Solar Glaive Judgment of Kel'Grath, which is really not widely available anymore. Like occasionally you may see it at the Gunsmith, Xur may have it, or you can get it to drop from the exotic mission Operation Seraph Shield. So if you've never got that Judgment of Kel'Grath or never even got the ability to craft it, then getting a god roll for Albedo Wing may be worth it. And getting that right roll really isn't that difficult, considering that you can get those upgrades with Eva called Perky Presence and Perk Your Presence, which will give you an extra trait in columns 3 and 4. Now what does this glaive offer that others don't? Now stat wise, it's pretty good, actually featuring better stats than that of Judgment of Kel'Grath in pretty much every category besides reload, airborne effectiveness, and aim assist. But what about its perk combinations? Again, sometimes Bungie gives us killer combos, even on weapons that are just dropping during a holiday event. Albedo has some interesting combinations. On its third column, we have Grave Robber, Beacon Rounds, Replenishing Aegis, Immovable Object, Keep Away, Clown Cartridge, and Field Prep. Now we're gonna go over PvE options first, and then we're gonna get into PvP later. But in our third column, the perk that interested us the most was Beacon Rounds. After final blows with this weapon, this will grant our projectiles tracking. Now up until now, there was only one weapon that had this perk. This is the Rocket Sidearm from Warlord's Ruin, Indebted Kindness. We did a review on it. It's a unique weapon for sure. Now that weapon can roll with Beacon Rounds. And yes, it does perform well on that weapon. Question is, how does it perform on a glaive? Unfortunately, not quite as good as the sidearm. Guys, I actually had a difficult time even telling if the projectile was tracking or not until I found the trick. The target essentially needs to be somewhere within the glaive's reticle on your screen. Otherwise, it won't track and will just straight up miss. Now, it's not terrible, but not quite as good as we had hoped, and definitely not as good as the sidearm. And it's interesting that Bungie didn't make the tracking here as aggressive. Maybe they were concerned that it would be too strong inside of PvP, but on the glaive, guys, Beacon Rounds isn't suddenly making this glaive meta inside of PvP. Now, moving on, we have Replenishing Aegis, where blocking damage partially reloads the weapon from reserves, and it's always been a decent perk, but not a top pick of ours. However, this season, with the most recent changes to glaives, where our shields passively regenerate, this makes this perk much more worthwhile, and definitely worth using your block ability, which I know for many, most people forget about. But there are certain environments where you're taking so much damage that you need a glaive to keep you alive. So again, guys, the changes here to glaives, the passively regeneration of your shields, this is a great change for all glaives, including Albedo Wing. Now, considering at base, this glaive has only 3 shots, and it has a slow reload speed. That reload from reserves is a huge benefit here with Replenishing Aegis. And it's a good gameplay loop of blocking damage with your shield, dealing damage to give you even more shield, continue blocking, and reloading your glaive all in the same process. Now, the obvious perk for my glaive enthusiasts out there is, of course, Grave Robber. The ability to run in there, land a melee kill, and auto-reload your weapon. It literally synergizes with itself. Now, moving over to our fourth column, we have Golden Tricorn, Demolitionist, Lead from Gold, Deconstruct, Attrition Orbs, High Impact Reserves, and Close to Melee. Now, the go-to option for really pumping out some crazy damage is Close to Melee. This increases our glaive melee damage after getting a projectile final blow, bringing our melee damage from 13,946 versus Carl up to 18,130. Now, we've seen this on a number of other glaives already, so it's not like this is something new, but regardless, it's still a good pick. Now, you also have Golden Tricorn, which is a good damage perk, especially when synergizing our neutral game. Again, keep in mind, Glaives got a damage buff at the beginning of the season, and with Golden Tricorn, simply getting a weapon kill is going to give us a 15% damage bonus for 7 seconds to our glaive projectiles. And then further, after getting an ability Final Blow at ×2, giving us a 50% damage bonus for 10 seconds. Here's where it hurts with Golden Tricorn. It does not proc on melee kills, which sucks. Only projectile kills. And if you're looking to get that ×2, you have to get a grenade kill, as you can't use your melee because you're holding your glaive. Really, Bungie, could you make this synergize a little better? I feel like this would be a great perk. It really would be, if it actually worked as it should. So unfortunately, Golden Tricorn kind of makes this glaive feel restrictive when it comes to chaining those damage buffs. Granted, keep in mind, it's not like it's difficult to get a grenade kill inside of PvE, and the 15% damage bonus is really nice, but I just find that the lack of synergy here just feels unpleasant. But in terms of damage perks, Golden Tricorn is the best, at least here on this weapon. Now, everything else in that 4th column is a little more niche. Lead from Gold is good for more ammo. I'm not a big fan of Deconstruct. Attrition Orbs was interesting, though I want to specify was. This perk took 5 shots to activate, which is my entire mag on the roll that I had, and it does not activate on melee kills. Again, all of this is a big head scratcher because it's like, Bungie, you give us these cool perks, but it doesn't synergize with glaives. This would be a fantastic way to generate free orbs. But the way it sits now, guys, Attrition Orbs is not the way to go, which is why the God row here is exactly what everyone expected. Grave Robber and close to melee. And if not that route, maybe replenishing Aegis and Golden Tricorn if you're looking to shoot your projectiles more often. Now, we talked about what makes Albedo Wing different. The question is, how does it feel? Now, like we said in our pre and post testing videos, glaives feel overall a lot better. They're way more intuitive to use now. And even something here like an aggressive frame glaive feels pretty good to use and not nearly as clunky before, outside of course the low handling. Damage wise, we're looking at the same performance as we would get out of Judgment of Kel'Garath, dealing 46,598 projectile damage to a red bar enemy and 31,065 projectile damage to Carl. Now, our melee damage is universal across all glaives, dealing 19,923 damage to red bars and 13,946 damage to Carl. Now, that change to passive shield generation also makes these aggressive glaives feel way better to use, as both Albedo Wing and Judgment of Kel'Garath suffer from a fairly low shield duration stat at base. Now, if you're looking to enhance Albedo Wing, or really any glaive for that matter, you can use the recently buffed exotic Trident Vice. We're not necessarily crazy about this, but it is doing a lot better. Its perk, Halberdier's Reach, reads, increases glaive reload speed and melee damage when surrounded. Glaive melee final blows overflow a round to the magazine, and glaive projectile final blows detonate if the glaive deals damage matching your subclass type. Now, we did a review on this exotic a few months ago, and we hated it. It was literally pointless, as at the time, it was one of the worst exotics in the game. But this exotic received some very good buffs this past season, with its glaive melee damage bonus when surrounded being increased to 100% in both PvE and PvP. Now listen, don't get me wrong, this is a good change, and I do like this glaive. But keep in mind, guys, at the end of the day, whether it's Trident Vice, Worm God's Caress, Syntheseps, which by the way, all buff damage pretty substantially, in high-end content, you will get shredded. Take this into a Grandmaster Nightfall and watch what happens. Or take it inside of PvP, and yes, you can annoy enemies, but for the most part, unless you have that shield ready and you really lean into this playstyle, there's just a lot of room here for you to be outplayed. Even when bringing into something like Checkmate, where I know special ammo isn't readily available, I was hoping, considering I can lean in on its melee more, I can close the gap without a shotgun being shoved down my throat. Maybe, just maybe, Albedo Wing here could be usable. But guys, at the end of the day, it's still a glaive. But Cross, it can one-shot inside of PvP with Tricorn ×2, add an Empowering Rift or Radiant, and you can one-shot even Max Resilience Guardians. Fellas, do you know how many hoops that requires you to jump through? At no point is any of this feasible. So full circle back to our first question. Is Albedo Wing worth your time? Here's the thing, guys. If you're looking for an arc glaive that can roll with pretty standard perks for PvE, that being Grave Robber and close to melee, and if you just want to collect another aggressive frame glaive, by all means, guys, Albedo Wing is yours. However, I do have to say, Bungie missed an incredible opportunity. Considering the theme of the Dawning, it's literally the Christmas event. It's cold. This would have been a perfect opportunity to have made this glaive stasis. And considering the only other sword in the entire game that can roll with the perk Cold Steel comes from a sword that only drops in the Dawning, that being Zephyr, it would make sense that this glaive would be stasis that could roll with Cold Steel. I'm actually really bummed out that this was not the case. And believe me, guys, I try to get in here and say, listen, there's there's pros to this weapon. Here's some unique synergy here. But all Albedo Wing really does for me is make me wish that it was stasis and it had cold steel. So guys, that is our review. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Again, if you're loving this glaive, by all means, love it, enjoy it, play with it. Don't let me poop on your parade. I'm simply just stating what I wish this glaive was. And considering that the Destiny community will move mountains to snag that unique weapon, this right here could have been something really special for all of us. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.